Hidden headlights, chrome ashtrays, seatbelt buzzers, pop-up radios. Every one of them told a story about how cars used to feel alive, but one by one, they vanished. Today, we're uncovering the 10 strangest car features that quietly disappeared, and the surprising reasons the industry doesn't want them back. Number 10, pop-up headlights, the eyes that blinked goodbye. They weren't just headlights, they were expressions. When a car blinked its lights open, it didn't just illuminate the road, it came alive. From the sharp-nosed Ferrari Testarossa to the humble Mazda Miata, pop-up headlights were one of the few design elements that turned machines into personalities. They made cars feel playful, even flirtatious, as if they knew they looked good. The story begins in 1936 when the Cord 810 introduced the world's first hidden headlights, hand-cranked mechanisms that tucked neatly into the fenders. It was pure theater for the time. But it wasn't until the 70s, 80s, and 90s that pop-ups defined an era. They symbolized progress, a time when engineers were chasing aerodynamic dreams, and style wasn't limited by safety laws. But that freedom wouldn't last. By the early 2000s, pop-ups were dying out. The culprits were both safety and efficiency. European pedestrian protection standards demanded smoother front ends. A rigid pop-up headlight could cause severe injury in an impact. Meanwhile, new fixed designs with HID and LED technology offered better performance without the complexity or cost of moving parts. There were other problems too: weight, water leaks, and mechanical failure. Over time, those motors that once made your car blink often just froze. What once felt futuristic became fragile. The Mazda RX-7 Spirit R, discontinued in 2004, is often remembered as the last great send-off, a final salute to an idea that made cars look alive. Number 9. Hood ornaments, when cars wore crowns. Once upon a time, every luxury car wore a crown. A hood ornament wasn't decoration, it was identity. From the Spirit of Ecstasy on a Rolls Royce to the Leaping Jaguar, these sculptures weren't just metal mascots, they were pride made visible. The tradition dates back to the 1910s, when early cars needed radiator caps accessible on the hood. Automakers began turning these mundane parts into works of art, symbols of motion, strength, and status. Mercedes had its three-pointed star, Packard had a graceful goddess of speed, even Pontiac in its heyday had a glowing amber chief mounted proudly on the nose. By the 1950s, hood ornaments were everywhere. Eagles, arrows, rockets, and mythical creatures soaring above chrome seas. They defined an era when car design was flamboyant, fearless, and deeply personal. But by the 1980s, the icons started to disappear. The reason? Safety and theft. Rising pedestrian safety laws outlawed protruding ornaments that could cause injury in a collision, and thieves were snatching them faster than manufacturers could replace them. In some cities, hood ornament chains became street fashion, a strange trophy of rebellion. By the 2000s, even Rolls-Royce, the last holdout, had to adapt. Their engineers built an ingenious retractable mechanism that hides the Spirit of Ecstasy inside the grille the moment someone tries to tamper with it. It was both protection and symbolism. The world no longer wanted cars that stood tall and proud. It wanted them sleek, safe, and subtle. Today, hood ornaments survive only as faint echoes, miniature emblems pressed flat into badges. The art is gone, the arrogance is gone, and with them, a little of the soul of driving disappeared too. Number 8. Vent windows, the tiny triangles that changed everything. Before air conditioning became standard, these little glass triangles were the unsung heroes of every road trip. They were called vent windows, small pivoting panes in the front corners of your doors. You cracked one open and suddenly, fresh air swirled through the cabin like nature's AC. It sounds simple today, but back in the 1940s through the 1970s, vent windows were essential. They reduced wind noise, cooled the car, and even helped smokers flick ashes without rolling the main window down. For decades, they were everywhere, from Chevys and Cadillacs to Fords and Volkswagens. But like so many great ideas, they were victims of progress. When factory air conditioning became affordable in the 1970s, vent windows turned into a design inconvenience. They complicated door construction, weakened crash safety, and increased wind resistance. A nightmare for modern aerodynamics. By the 1990s, the once beloved triangles were gone, sealed off in the name of efficiency. Ironically, the result was stuffier cabins, higher AC use, and less character. Ask any classic car owner today, and they'll tell you those tiny windows weren't just for air, they were a symbol of freedom. You didn't just drive, you breathed the road. Number 7. Cigarette lighters and ashtrays, the smoking gun of car culture. There was a time when every car came with a lighter, not a USB port. A small chrome chrome socket in the dash, a satisfying click, and a glowing coil that meant one thing: freedom. From the 1950s through the early 2000s, smoking was so normal that ashtrays were everywhere. On the dash, in the doors, even in the back seats. Luxury cars had illuminated ashtrays, and some Cadillacs even came with crystal cigarette cases. It wasn't just an accessory, it was standard equipment. So what changed? The same thing that killed most personality in cars: liability, health, and cost. As smoking bans spread and lawsuits mounted in the 1990s, automakers quietly phased them out. By the 2000s, new cars had replaced the cigarette lighter with the 12-volt accessory outlet, a name so dull it almost feels intentional. Some brands even charged extra for smokers' packages, turning what was once free into an optional add-on. The ashtrays disappeared, the sockets became chargers, and an entire era of driving culture vanished. For decades, lighting a cigarette on the highway was a ritual. One hand on the wheel, one flicking ashes into the wind. Now that same socket powers phone chargers, GPS units, and dash cams. It's poetic, really. The part of the car once used to kill time now keeps us connected to it. Number 6. Bench seats, when front seats were for two. Once upon a time, the front seat wasn't just a place to sit, it was a place to be together. Before bucket seats took over, cars came with wide front benches that could fit 3 people shoulder to shoulder. In the 1950s, they were everywhere. Chevy Bel Airs, Ford Fairlanes, and Cadillac DeVilles, a symbol of American comfort and connection. Couples remember them as the date night seats. You could slide right next to your partner, hand on the wheel, arm around their shoulder, cruising down Main Street with the radio humming. It was romance on wheels. But as cars got faster and safety regulations tighter, the bench seats' days were numbered. In the 1960s, performance-oriented designs demanded individual bucket seats for better control. By the 1980s, center consoles, airbags, and seatbelt regulations made the old bench layout nearly impossible to keep. Suddenly, what was once cozy became outdated, even unsafe. By the early 2000s, the last full-size sedans like the Chevy Impala and Ford Crown Victoria quietly ended the tradition. Trucks were the final holdouts, but even they eventually switched to center consoles and cup holders that split the driver and passenger apart. The bench seat didn't just disappear. It symbolically marked the end of an era when cars were more than transport. They were an experience. Now every seat is isolated, every driver is alone, and while modern interiors might be sleeker, they'll never feel quite as warm as those long, cushioned benches where love stories once began. Number 5. Automatic seat belts, the safety feature everyone hated. They were supposed to save lives, but instead they just annoyed everyone. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, a strange trend swept through the auto industry: motorized seat belts. When you shut your door or turned the key, a belt would glide automatically across your chest, clicking into place like a robot valet. The idea sounded futuristic, safety that worked for you, but in practice, it was clunky, loud, and often painful. The story begins with new US federal safety regulations in the early 1980s. Automakers were required to install passive restraint systems in all vehicles, meaning the car had to protect you even if you didn't buckle up. Most manufacturers didn't want to invest in full airbag systems yet, so they chose the cheaper route: automatic seat belts. At first it seemed clever. Cars like the Toyota Camry, Honda Accord, and Geo Prism all came with them, but the problems appeared fast. Belts jammed, motors burned out, and drivers hated the lack of control. Worse, many people disconnected them or sat on top of the lap portion, defeating the entire purpose. By the mid-1990s, airbags became mandatory, and automakers couldn't ditch automatic seatbelts fast enough. They were bulky, expensive, and had the uncanny ability to scare passengers every time they moved. Today, they're a perfect example of good intentions gone wrong, a solution to a problem that technology simply outgrew. In hindsight, they weren't a safety innovation. They were a reminder that not every futuristic idea belongs on the road. Number 4. Retractable antennas, when cars had whiskers. Before cars had Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and satellite radio, they had something far more elegant: a slender metal antenna rising proudly from the fender. And if your car was fancy, that antenna didn't just sit there, it moved. In the 1970s through the 1990s, power antennas became a sign of luxury. Turn on the ignition or the radio, and the thin chrome mast would glide smoothly upward with a soft electric hum. Turn it off, and it vanished, disappearing neatly into the bodywork. It was a small gesture, but it made cars feel alive, almost polite, like they were bowing before driving off. But as technology advanced, that charm was replaced by practicality. Modern antennas became shorter, more efficient, and far less fragile. By the 2000s, automakers switched to in-glass antennas, integrated invisibly into the windshield or rear window. They offered the same function with zero maintenance and zero character. Retractable antennas also suffered from their own success. Motor failure failures, snapped masts, and expensive replacements were common. A single car wash could bend them beyond repair. For manufacturers chasing sleek aerodynamics and lower production costs, the choice was obvious. By the mid-2000s, power antennas were gone, replaced by shark fin modules that looked more like Wi-Fi routers than style statements. What was once a mark of sophistication became a forgotten quirk of analog design. Today, the only time you'll see one rise from a car's fender is in old movies, or in the driveway of someone who still remembers the thrill of hearing their radio come alive with a quiet mechanical whir. Number 3. Wood paneling, when cars pretended to be furniture. There was a time when driving a car made of wood wasn't just normal, it was stylish. The legendary woody wagons of the 1940s and 1950s didn't just carry families, they carried an identity. Gleaming wooden doors, handcrafted trim, and polished grain patterns made cars look like rolling pieces of art. It was craftsmanship on wheels, a time when design came from carpenters as much as engineers. But that charm came at a price. Literally. Real wood required constant maintenance. It cracked, warped, and rotted in the rain. By the 1950s, automakers like Ford and Chrysler started faking it, replacing actual lumber with metal panels covered in wood grain vinyl. The illusion worked. Cars like the Ford Country Squire, Buick Estate Wagon, and Jeep Grand Wagoneer made faux wood a cultural icon. The look screamed family adventure, summer road trips, and American suburbia. By the 1980s, though, the act wore thin. What once looked premium started to look cheesy, like your grandparents' basement paneling on wheels. The vinyl aged poorly, peeled in the sun, and made cars harder to sell. When minimalist styling took over in the 1990s, the last traces of fake wood quietly vanished. The final holdout was the Jeep Grand Wagoneer, whose boxy wood-trimmed sides became a symbol of the end of an era. Still, woody wagons left behind a unique kind of nostalgia. The smell of surf wax, station wagons full of beach towels, and a time when cars didn't just move families, they defined them. Modern crossovers might be sleeker, faster, and more practical, but none will ever feel as warm as a wagon that looked ready for a weekend at the lake. Number 2. Hidden fuel doors, when even gas caps had style. In today's cars, the fuel door is just there. A flat square stamped into the body, painted the same color as everything else, waiting for you to press and fill up. Functional, forgettable. But there was a time when even refueling was part of the design. From the 1950s through the 1980s, automakers took pride in hiding fuel fillers, turning them into little Easter eggs of engineering creativity. Take the 1956 Chevy Bel Air, where the gas cap was tucked behind the left tail light. Twist the lens, and the whole thing flipped open. Or the 60s Cadillac Coupe de Ville, which hid its filler behind the rear license plate. You'd lift the plate like a trap door to find the nozzle waiting underneath. Even the 70s Dodge Charger and Pontiac GTO played with symmetry, integrating the fuel cap into the taillight trim so cleanly you'd never notice it unless you knew where to look. It wasn't just clever, it was character. Designers didn't see cars as simple machines, they saw them as puzzles. Every curve, every emblem, every hinge served a purpose and a personality. So why did it disappear? Two things: safety and cost. By the 1990s, stricter emissions and crash standards demanded more standardized fuel systems. Hidden fillers were expensive to design and harder to access for repairs. Plastic bumpers, crumple zones, and vapor-sealed tanks made style-first fuel doors a liability. The last real holdouts were Corvettes and Chryslers, which used flush designs well into the 2000s, before finally surrendering to uniformity. Today, every fuel door looks identical, a perfect symbol of how safety, efficiency, and regulation quietly replaced imagination. Number 1. The ignition key, the ritual that defined driving. There was a time when starting your car felt like an event. You didn't press a button, you didn't use an app. You took a metal key, slid it into the ignition, and felt the tension as you turned it. That half second of mechanical resistance before the engine came roaring to life. That sound, the starter motor spinning, the engine catching, no, it was pure emotion. It was the heartbeat of driving itself, and it's almost gone. The traditional car key first appeared in the 1910s, but it became universal by the 1950s, when automakers integrated the ignition switch directly into the dashboard or steering column. For decades, the ritual stayed the same. You could close your eyes and feel the start. Cold metal against your fingers, that moment of connection between human and machine. But by the early 2000s, that connection was replaced with convenience. Keyless entry and push start systems promised futuristic simplicity. Just carry a fob, press a button, and you're ready to go. It's cleaner, faster, and emptier. There's no click, no twist, no physical bond between driver and car. The shift wasn't just about comfort, it was about technology. Anti-theft systems, immobilizers, and digital security made old keys obsolete. Modern vehicles don't turn over and they boot up like computers. And while it's undeniably practical, something important was lost in translation.